everyone for joining us for another week of In Rhythm Lightning Talks. For those of you who don't know me, I am Jen Crawford, and I have the pleasure of co-hosting In Rhythm's Lightning Talks. For those of you who have never joined a Lightning Talk before, Lightning Talks happen and are done and completed by one of our practice area consultants. It is an opportunity for them to teach back to the In Rhythm community and the technical community at large, both on LinkedIn and also on YouTube. This week, I have the pleasure of co-hosting this space with Mike Elledge. He is going to be talking about one of my favorite things, Swagger.UI. Different kind of swagger, but I still like the name. And so with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to you, Mike.
As soon as I can find the controls. There we go. Whoops. I think, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, good. All right. Hi, guys. I'm Mike Elledge. I'm one of our senior software engineers at In Rhythm, and I focus mainly on our back-end API developments, and primary language of choice is C#. Recently, in both of our multitude of our engagements, we've been working on doing new RESTful APIs. And of course, some of the fun part that you have to do for all engagements is do your documentation, right? And not only that, you have to come up with contracts and figure out a way to expose the back end to the front end. And there's a toolkit out there already for doing that, especially for C#. It's also for many other languages, for Java, for Python, for Go, for a large number. They support over 25 languages currently, and there's of course a lot of in-house building that goes on. But the purpose of it is to produce an open specification that's called Swagger. It used to be called Swagger, and now it's called the Open API. And let's jump in and talk about what we're going to be talking about. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is what is Swagger and what's the Open API specification. Then we're going to go over some of this, the tooling that we have available for C#. We're going to talk about the really cool super feature of Swagger.UI, which just really saves us a lot of time. And then I'm going to give you a couple of quick overviews of how easy it is to do inside of Visual Studio and some of the functionality. Okay, Swagger and OpenAI. Swagger and the OpenAI API is language agnostic, and it doesn't matter what it is. It's a set of specifications and markups that describes a REST API, and you don't need access to the source code. So the Swagger project is being supported on Swagger.io, and it's also really well documented on Microsoft's Docs website. Christoph Niemober and Rico Suter have written this wonderful little paragraph about describing Swagger. Swagger used to be its own project over in up until 2015, in which case it was moved over to the Open API organization, and it's now managed under the Open API. So, there we go. So it was donated to the Open API initiative in 2015, has been referred to as Open API. But you'll hear people use both interchangeably. When they're talking about Swagger, they're talking about Open API. When they're talking about Open API, they're talking about Swagger. In short, Open API is the specification. Swagger is the tooling that most people use to actually to generate this. There's an Open API generator where you can actually start your entire project from an Open API specification to begin with, and then co-develop the front end and back end based on that definition. Or you can go through and some of the other tools will let you take an existing model, like in C#, take one of the controllers and go through and be able to produce the Open API specification, and then you can consume that in other utilities and be able to create SDKs and stuff, maybe for the front end or such. Okay, so Open API is the specification, and normally when you produce one of them, the default is openapi.json. I use a particular tooling kit that comes with Visual Studio, which is Swashbuckle, and they call it the Swagger.json. But it doesn't really matter what it is. It's all a bunch of XML markup that with attribute annotations, and it completely describes the endpoints, including all inputs, all outputs, the entire schema of any properties and components that are composed of this RESTful API. Now, this is just a really short example of just about the smallest one you can get. These API specification docs can actually get into multiple megabytes of just textual data, depending on how many controllers you're describing in the doc. Okay, so most of our tooling most of the time that we're working in C#, we're working in Visual Studio Professional, and Swagger is now a first citizen for Visual Studio, and that makes it really cool for when we're doing .NET Code, .NET Core web apps APIs. Okay, so Swashbuckle just recently got introduced into this, I think within the last year and a half. Before that, you had to manually add it, and you can add it or one of the other tooling packages for that. Another very common package for Visual Studio is InSwag. Jen, you probably like that name just as much as you like the Swagger, right? Is
Swashbuckle?
No,
yeah.
InSwag.
Oh, InSwag, yeah.
Yes, that was another one. But Swashbuckle one with Microsoft, and they're the one that they actually got introduced into the tool by default. So, and we can really use some of the cool features of that. Swashbuckle also has a complete set of libraries that allow you to directly bring in ASP.NET Core, ASP.NET, and I think they support a couple of other languages directly out of there. So when we start a new C# project and we want to start it at ASP.NET Core Web API, one of the options it asks us for is what our target framework is. Latest, greatest one is .NET 5.0. We won't sidestep and talk about that right now, but one of the things that you'll do notice is that down here at the bottom we have this now cute little button that says Enable Open API Support. Now, this literally saves you probably about half an hour of getting all the stuff wired up from a project that doesn't have it built in natively. Okay, so once you go through the tooling and you go through and do all your work, then the output for this is a really cool UI called Swagger.UI. Swagger.UI allows anyone, even Wei-Fei, to go through and be able to test the endpoints without actually knowing anything about what the RESTful API does on the back end. It fully documents your inputs. It tells you what the output should look like. It tells you what the endpoints are. It tells you the routes to them. It tells you anything you need to. And the beautiful part is an interactive one. So we can actually go through and mash buttons, put inputs in, and get values out. So, and as a developer, when we go through, we can make this UI very rich. We can add additional annotations and XML markups inside the source code that gives us even a better interface for somebody who either, it might be a unit tester, part of QA. They might need to go through and be saying, hey, I need to test this. I need to come up with my automated testing and all this stuff. But what does the request package look like? The Swagger.UI interface allows them to go through, mash a few buttons, and get that format very quickly. So when we go through and set up a default brand new ASP.NET Core Web API project inside of Visual Studio 2019, the template just automatically runs, and it will give us this boilerplate here. Now, if you'll notice here, there's very little information on it. It does give us here the name of the application was Swagger Demo 1. We get a link to download the Swagger JSON. So if we need to push that into one of the other tools to get the SDK developed, or if we need to go through and run that into a document management system, so where we can maybe actually produce readable API docs. That's a very useful link to be able to get to there. But the also thing it gives us is it will list every single controller inside this API based on the route that's given, and then it will give us buttons that we can press to actually activate each of those endpoints. Down at the bottom, it will give us the components that are used within this. So in this particular case, they give you a startup controller called the weather forecast controller, and it has one method on it, which is get all weather forecast. And the schema for that is the object of a weather forecast. Didn't expand it here, but I'll show it to you here in a second. Now, all that's great, but there's so much more we can do with it, right? So we can take the basic application as soon as the page loads here. Okay, and we can still get our Swagger.json that we can export anywhere we need to, but now we can add a lot of more information. We can get a very, very verbose overview about what this application does, or what these endpoints are intended for, or give the consumer any in-depth details that we need to. There are other pieces of information we can add here. We can go through and add licensing information, or contractual obligations about, hey, if you're using this thing, there are other options that I didn't even get into on this one, but we have a large amount of information that we can add up here in this title block. Another thing we can do is add security requirements. If we need to go through and maybe put a bearer token on these APIs to secure them, it says, hey, you can't get to this unless you have been authenticated through some other methodology. We can go through here and put a little authorized button here, and it'll say, hey, give me your token, or give me your username password, depending on how we want to set up the information. And then, as I spoke to earlier, it goes out there and finds every controller that we've exposed inside this project, and says, okay, we're going to list those individually, and then we're going to give all endpoints off of that controller. And then still down at the bottom, it'll go through and give us all the schemas of all the objects. Now, collapsed here, so you don't get to see all the cool markups on that, but we'll deep dive into that here in a few moments during the demos. But as you see here, there's one place for end users, or maybe front-end developers or QA personnel that can go through and they can test these things without actually having maybe the front end or the UI application available to them, but they can go through and start doing their testing for the back end, and either for just validation that the back end is given the right responses, or in the case of the front end developers, they can go through and work on the contracts that will get them to be able to link the front end to the back end very quickly. Okay, so now let's get to the fun part now, which is the demos. Oh, there's some reference links. We'll be posting this. We'll post the PowerPoint afterwards, and this is where a huge amount of information and a large amount of the text that I put into the presentation came from. Okay, let's get out of the PowerPoint and jump over here. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to do is ignore that one first, and let's go through and just start a new. We're going to start a brand new project. Okay, and the first thing Visual Studio asks is, what kind of project are we going to create? And I've already used it multiple times, so it keeps up with the last one. So we're going to create another one of these, and we're going to call this do Swagger demo. Okay, computer is freezing up just a little bit on me. Okay, and we're not too worried about all of this information because it's going to just be for demonstration purposes anyway. Getting over to our next page. This was the screen that I positioned earlier. The only thing that we have to make sure for our purpose of making sure that Swagger is enabled is make sure that the open API support is enabled. And if we don't put this, we could actually go through and again, we could put it in there manually afterwards, but this saves us a lot of time of wiring it up. So we're going to go and create the new project. Takes just a few moments here. And here we are. Now, so what this has created is taking the template and just create us some very rudimentary boilerplate information. It gives us the weather forecast object that if we open up, it has a, it's got a date, the temperature in Celsius, temperature in Fahrenheit, and a summary, okay? And the controller itself, it has one method, which is the get method there. Okay, but now notice these are just very basic. They just have enough information to be able to say, hey, this is the API, this is the route that we're going to get to, this is the request type, which is the get, and the route that we use to get to it. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to standalone and run the application. It will compile. And it will run. Okay. And then what we get with absolutely no additional work, we get the demo that we, the screens that we showed earlier. Now, if we click on this link here, this will go through and give us the contract for this controller. Weather forecast is a route to it based on the URL of the server that you connected it to. And here is our first method, which is the get. We have some responses of there of 200 and gives you back a weather forecast. Here is a weather forecast object. And here's the date that we talked about, the temperature C, temperature Fahrenheit, and the summary. So we can take this JSON, either convert it to YAML, or there are tools that can consume the JSON directly and produce either a PDF readable for it. There is a code generator where you go through and maybe create a React SDK or an Angular package for it. Anyway, you can take this information and very quickly go through and give all these endpoint definitions to your front-end developers. But one of the cool things that we can also do is we can test it out, right? We can go through and say, oh, we want to see what this thing does. It gives us an example response out of the box. And it's going to say, okay, this is going to give me an array of these things. Well, where did those come from? Oh, if I come over here and look at the schema, oh, it's a weather forecast. Okay, and it's an array of weather forecasts. And so we go through here and open this up, and a weather forecast has a date, a temperature C, temperature F, and a summary. Strings, integers, and just the basic information. Now this one does actually have the read-only flag on this one, and this one has the nullable flag. I'll circle back to these anyway. But if I hit this out button right now and try it out, it's going to allow me to execute it. And it's actually going to run the method on the server, and the server has returned back with a 200 response code, and this is the body that it came back with. And this is what we were expecting. So fully successful on this. Now, one of the cool things that we actually get, especially for QA, is that we get this curl request right here. Curl is a common communication definition for Postman request, and Postman allows you to go through and set up your automated API testing. So with this curl request, we have a known set of inputs. We can go through, run it directly through Postman, and Postman can go through now and just churn on these to execute each of these endpoints. But as you see, there's not much information here. It gives us what the object structure is, but we don't know what any of this is. Yes, it's a weather forecast. Well, we're smart. We know what a forecast is. So I bet it's a list of days and what their high and low temperatures are. This one's going to be really cold, I think, but that's okay. The next day it's going to be really warm. So you'll freeze to death, but you'll thaw out really fast. Okay, so out of the box, we didn't we didn't have to do absolutely anything to wire it up, and we were able to get a pretty easy interface to go through and test the rudimentary setup of the route, the API. If this was in a container, and if I'd set this up to run in a container, we could run to make sure that it was containerized correctly and that it would automatically run, and we could hit the endpoint and it was giving us the data that we were expecting. Okay, but like I said back in the presentation, we can do so much more. Okay, so let's switch over to the to-do application. Now, I'm gonna run this one. And again, it's gonna start on the other screen. Still couldn't figure out why it was doing that. This one gives us a lot more information. This one we've gone through and put a description for what the application is. It gives us a contact lead. You can either have, a name. You could have a support group. You can put information here like a phone number or stuff like that. One of the things I kind of glossed over earlier is that this gives us the capability. This one tells you what version of the API you're working with, as well as the output. The two common outputs are the Open API specs 2 and 3, where nowadays almost everyone's using 3, but goes back to which tools are using which format they're expecting. Like I said, almost everyone's using 3. One of the things that the Swagger.UI does give us the ability is that if we did have multiple versions, we could go through and select which version we wanted at this point in time. So why would you have multiple versions of your API? Well, so maybe certain endpoints are deprecated and they're not in part of version 2. So if you're running version 2, you could test it and make sure that those particular endpoints don't exist. Or maybe you want to reuse some of the endpoints but the version 2 has more data or has more required inputs, or just maybe just does something entirely different at all. So if we do have multiple versions defined over in our application, we can say, hey, yes, for this one, I want to use V1 or V2 or V10 or whatever one is in the definition file. So this application, I went through and put a full CRUD endpoint together for our to-do list. Okay, so what this is, controller is done is go through it, and it's not fully wired up. It's just enough for us to do a proof of concept demo, but gives us all the endpoints that we need. And the one that we replicated, of course, was give me all of the to-dos that are in the system. Again, you click on the one you want, you unlock it by hitting try it out, and then we hit execute. But now check this out. Now we have some cool information here. This one says it's a get and it's to-dos, but this gets a list of all the to-dos. Great. But look at here. The developers went through and said, oh, the default sorting for this is the ID, and it's descending. So if you needed some, if the people on the front end were, concerned about, hey, is this a random thing? Are we doing it by date? Are we doing it by, how are we sorting these? The backend developer can tell the front end guy, hey, this thing's coming back by ID. So we have remarks that we can add to, we have a description that we can add to it, and we can go through and say that we have multiple responses. Back over in the stock, the only response they had was a 200, but we can go through and we can put a full complement of what possible responses that this particular endpoint would get to. 200, of course, is success. 400 says that we're not authorized, which means maybe we didn't, we either forgot to log in or our login was invalid. This authorized button does not tell you success or failure until you actually hit the endpoint. So if the endpoint does our authorization, then it needs to be able to respond back that it's not authorized. And then a 404 is very common for no items were found. So there's a discussion out there that sometimes 404 is appropriate or a 204 is appropriate, which is an empty result. In other words, everything went fine there, we just didn't find anything. But that's another topic for discussion too. We go ahead and hit execute at this point in time. What we're expecting back, according to this documentation, is going to be an array of these objects. Okay, well, that looks pretty, but can you give me that to me in maybe in discussion, in object names? Oh, okay, so it's an array of to-dos. And what are to-dos? Oh, okay, to-dos have an ID, a description, notes, start times, and end times. But what is a to-do? It's a friendly reminder for oneself that something should be done. Well, so the developer's telling us what this object was intended for. Of course, it gives us the name of the property and then what the type of it is, but it also gives us the indicators like read only, which means is that if you are going to to modify this particular item, which we'll see down in the put method, you can't change these fields. They're read only. You can change the other ones that aren't, but this one is definitely not changeable. Over here next to these, we also get these little indicators over here that you see these little red stars that might be kind of hard to see on this particular one, but this is a required field. It's absolutely necessary that you put something in this field if you're doing either a post or a put or a patch, so that the system will not accept a null value. But look here, we've also gave some other things that says the max length for this particular field is only 255, and the default value is to do. Now, of course, having a default value of to do just says that, okay, if you actually mask the button, it's not going to blow up because it's not populated as a required field. But we'll go through and talk about what happens if you leave this value as to do in a second. And then it gives a description for what this particular one is. This is a brief description of what this activity or task is. We've added notes to a to do, and that gives us a lot more. We have a lot more space on this one. We've got 4 times the space on this one, but this one is also not required. This one, you don't have to put in there. So if for our lightning talk today, I might have wanted to maybe put a URL in there for, a link for the Zoom call or something like that. And I could put that in the notes. Start time, of course, is required. It would be the only time for that. And it's the date or time that activity should be started. And then if it's a span of time that you wanted to do for your to do, then we've got an end time. That's great. So, but this is all great that we have all this rich information, and this would give maybe the QA personnel or the front end developers saying, oh, okay, so that's how I use these. These are what they're for. This might help me in the UI construction, about how I laid it out or what type of information it was. And it's very useful, but also at the same time, they can go over and say, this is the format that is coming in. The UI developers are always asking me, well, what's the schema that's coming in? Well, it's an array, and it's an array of these objects. These objects are, you see in this particular case, are unnamed. It's just a list of objects, and those objects are of type to-dos, but you might not really care on the front end, depending on what programming language you're using. If we hit execute on this one actually does something. It gives us 2 to-dos. First one was a lightning talk, and it's right now. And then I put another one in there for tomorrow's stand-up, so I just wouldn't forget, because sometimes I'm a little late, all that stuff. So that's really cool. Now we went through and I put information in here for the post create objects. And then down here we go to get, well, looky here. We have missed the description on this. So we can probably infer a large amount of information just from from what we got, but we might need to work on what this is. Yeah, okay, we'll think about that. A put, of course, updates an existing to do, so it needs an idea of which one to do. And if you'll notice here, this one says that this is part of the request body that we're giving the package. In other words, we're not putting it on a query parameter for the URL. It more than likely will be as part of no, excuse me, it has to be part of the request body. So if we wanted to do this one real quick, we can try it out. We can put, let's see, we're going to put item 3. Let's see, we're on an odd time, so it needs to be an odd time. Description is going to be a test. The notes are going to be, I don't want notes on this one, and I don't want to end time. So the only thing we really need is this and this. We're going to hit execute, and it's going to update number 3, and we get object number 3 back. You'll see that this was the old description. So it's very common on a put to say, hey, you've updated something. What was the old values? Sometimes you don't do that. Sometimes you actually respond the complete new values. Just depends on whatever the necessary information is. But the really cool thing again is that we have a curl here that we can again take directly to Postman and execute this exact same call inside of Postman without having to go through and having the QA personnel manually type this out, which can get very tedious and be very error prone, especially when you're getting into these body definitions that have to be formatted just a specific way with the appropriate quotes and slashes and this and the other stuff. So that was pretty cool. So, and then of course we have a delete, which deletes an existing to do, and it gives us the appropriate thing. Again, we've updated all of this information to tell us what our possible responses are and what our bodies are during those responses. Okay, but now let's go back up and look at this one that we said, the get wasn't documented very well. So let's go see how much work it takes us to actually put in some of this documentation. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is go find the endpoint. Let's see here. We'll start at the top. There's our route. Here's our controller. There's the get alls. Oh, there's the get right there. Oh, look at this. There is no XML documentation for the get. Now, Visual Studio gives us a hotkeys scenario for being able to put this XML block in there very quickly. So as you notice, all I did was put in 3 forward slashes, and it gave me a rudimentary structure for the summary block. So in this one, this is going to be a get a single, if I could type, single to do, right? And the parameter is the ID. How about the unique identifier? The requested to do. Right, and then it's going to return a, so one of the things we might want to do is actually say that it's actually going to give me back one of these, the models. And part of the markup that I can do is to do a component reference with just a little bit of markup around it. It says see also. So we're going to go over there and we're going to say, hey, it's going to return us a single. But let's give it a little more information. If found, we have a single to-do model, right? Now, if you'll notice when we were actually, or if you'll remember back when we were doing the Swagger.UI, it wasn't showing to-do model, it was just showing to-do. And that was really easy for us to do as well. So if we come over here to the to-do model itself, one of the things we can do is put a display name tag on it and says, hey, I want to call this one a to-do as opposed to a to-do model. And that will keep us sane and instead of having to read models for a lot of redundancy. You'll see here that I've got a few markup annotations here that says this one is how we mark it read only. This is how we do the max length default value. And those show up over in the schema. But back to our endpoint that wasn't well documented. Now, if I run it right now, this is now going to give me a description, right? And it's going to explain what both of the parameters are, and it will tell me what the return values are. But the other ones had more, right? They had, what do we get if we get a response back of one of the types of responses that we were expecting? So we can add those response codes in there. Copy and paste is usually a great tool for this, because they're usually pretty much for most of the endpoints. And then what was some of the other stuff that we wanted to do? This is how we put remarks in. These are the remarks from the developers that augment the summary. Summary is a brief explanation of it. Remarks are technical aspects of it that might that not really don't fit into the summary, but things that you need to know if you're going to be using it. So let's see, that looks pretty good now. So do I have to do anything else? No, I don't. All we did was put an XML block in here with the summary, the parameter definitions, tell what the return type and the responses are, and now let's run it again. And again, it's going to show up off screen. Bring that back down here. And now we'll see that our get endpoint is now well documented. We get a single to do. We go through here and it tells us what this ID is, this unique identifier requested to do. Okay. And you see that it is required. Yeah, now we got all the good information. So very little effort, we're able to go through and provide some really useful feedback for our consumers of this endpoint. And that's the beauty of Swagger, is that it provides the Swagger.UI interface for both development testing as well as QA testing, as well as front-end development. But one of the other things that we're not going to do a deep dive in at this point in time, mainly because Carlos covered it a couple of weeks ago, is that you can take this JSON definition here and take it into other tools and be able to build SDKs that can be consumed directly from the front end. So they don't have to go through and redefine all of these components. Because, if the front end guys have to go through and manually type all of this, it's error prone, right? Especially if some of these components are really large, if they have a large number of properties, if they have a lot of information, maybe the data type gets messed up. It just saves all development parties a large amount of time to be able to take this, consume it, and use one of the other tools to produce an SDK and get your output. And some of those can be found back on. So if you go back over to Swagger.io, you can go in and see a laundry list of the utilities that are out there for that. There is a Swagger editor, a Swagger JSON editor, where you can actually start with developing this by hand, and then you can go through and take that. You can develop the C# code that I just did through Visual Studio, or you can go through and take this and export it into a React component library, so where they can take that and just bring that in, and they won't have to go through and define all of these components, and it saves a ton of time. So that's in a nutshell. Sorry it went over. I was only expecting you to talk about 30 minutes, but I like to talk. Just ask Prague. So yeah, there's and we only skim the edges. So there's a ton of capabilities in using Swagger that allows us to do documentation for internal and external use, and saves us a ton of time. Write once, distribute everywhere.
You can do a part 2 of your talk, Mike.
Say again?
We can do a part 2 of your talk.
Yeah, maybe later. So now, are there any questions?